This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. We build spillways to protect us from floodwaters coming downriver. Seldom has there been an issue with what's coming upriver. A wedge of salt water is the culprit. We will look tonight at the cause of the latest water threat and the effort to find solutions. State politics is starting to reach its crest with the election only 2 weeks away. We'll analyze some of the statewide races and the skirmishes for the Jefferson Parish Council. We'll also examine what the weather patterns look like for the rest of the year and, most importantly, investigate what effect they may have on the crawfish season. At the table for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Bruce Katz, chief meteorologist, WVUE-TV, Fox 8. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Blake Paterson, staff writer for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we go over to Bruce first because that's all everybody's thinking about and talking about right now is that saltwater wedge moving on up the Mississippi, and it's going to give us some trouble.
It is. Let's first talk about the geography of the river, New Orleans, and the Gulf. Well, from Natchez all the way to the mouth is below sea level. So basically you have a river here and you've got a Gulf here. Normally, when the river's high, it is equal or higher, and you get a flow to flush water out, salt water out. Well, with the drought being below sea level, now actually the river's flowing in from the Gulf, basically kind of downstream and working its way up. So the flow is down, rainwater from the north is down, not much in the future from what we see. So therefore, we are looking at this saltwater wedge that now is like the talk of the town, where back in '88 we had one, and it moved up to Plaquemines, it moved toward Belle Chase and those areas. We got rain soon enough on the northern end of the river to kind of flush it out, but there's not a lot of talk about that. People will say '88, but what were the effects of that in '88? Well, this time I think it's a bit different because back in '88, the Corps of Engineers, they really didn't have a plan or budget for a saltwater wedge. After that happened, thank goodness it wasn't a major ordeal. They put that into their plan. So now that we have this, they've been on top of it. They've been ahead of it. They know the heights they're trying to build. They know that shipping has to, continue. So now we're hearing about, this 1,500-foot underwater levee that's going to be 45 to 50 feet tall, 30 feet from the surface. And then in the middle of it, you're going to have this wedge up to 90 feet, so the hulls of these big shipping, container ships can go through. So, again, I study weather, but I also understand flow and things like that. And with a wedge that's going to be about 620 feet wide for ships to go through, you're going to have levees, wedge. The salt water is going to come through that wedge, but hopefully less water than not doing anything.
Okay, now, the concern is, of course, for this whole area and our drinking water, and then also how salt water could impact the pipes in our homes and businesses and buildings, our appliances. So, as you said, the Corps is building this sill on, on the bottom of the Mississippi. They're actually making it higher because they built it and then they figured, okay, we got to do this a little bit higher right now. And then they've been talking about barging in fresh water, like 36 million gallons a day, to the intake spots for the parish water systems. But because Orleans and Jefferson is so populated, that really won't work. So now they're thinking of something else.
They were thinking about doing a pipeline from Kenner to Carrollton and piping in water that way. Will it work or not? I don't know. I'm born and raised here. I've been on the air here for this is my 28th year, and I've never really heard of this much panic over a situation. I've heard it can happen. '88, I've just started my career in another city, so I wasn't really here to see all that. But you know, good point you mentioned is that saltwater, electronics, and metals, they don't go together. So therefore, even if they're going to use piping systems to pipe water in, how are they going to keep salt water out of even those without those corroding, much less what do you do about your own home? I mean, your washing machine, your dishwasher, ice makers, things like that. You know, I guess we're kind of learning on the fly here to kind of see how it really turns out.
Most filtration systems, whole home even, don't desalinate, right?
Right, exactly.
Except
They
for
take
the
out
reverse
chlorine, they take out
osmosis.
iron, they don't take out saline.
Exactly. So reverse osmosis is a way of doing it, but you can maybe do that on one sink, but how do you do it on your showers? How do you connect that to the point where it goes into your washing machine, into your dishwasher? So it's a conundrum.
It doesn't keep the water from going through your pipes.
It doesn't.
Too. It's just from that one faucet and clean it up.
Exactly.
So what the officials, the parish officials, have been saying over and over. Okay, no need to panic. You don't have to go out there and rush stores and buy, stacks and stacks of water. We will have water. That this is not a situation, like a pandemic when everybody was running out and buying all the toilet paper in the world. There will be ways to get water here. And it's hopeful that if they do the pipeline for the Orleans and Jefferson parishes, that they'll be able to bring in enough fresh water to mix in at the intake so that the sodium levels will be acceptable.
Acceptable, right.
But as you pointed out, in 1988, we apparently lived with this to some degree, at any rate, because it went up to Kenner, really, the saltwater wedge.
And you didn't hear reports of, or people who lived here didn't hear reports of everybody's washing machines failing and everybody's pipes corroding.
Right.
But that's what we're hearing right now. And so, all we can do now is, sit and wait and just sort of be prepared. Don't necessarily rush out and buy all the water in the world because there will be fresh water. It's just a concern of what it's going to do to our infrastructure, I suppose.
Exactly.
And then do rain dances and novenas for rain. We need rain. We need it here, but we really need it up north.
Up north. I mean, we are over 2 feet below average. And October is the driest month of the year. So that doesn't help us either. And the other thing is, too, I want to make a point where everyone is running to the store to buy water. Remember, this is an isolated situation. It's not like a hurricane coming in where the North Shore is doing it, the Bayou Parish. I mean, areas along the river intakes, those are the affected communities. So you're not getting this rush of a geographical area going and buying everything out. So, water is going to be there, as you said. They're going to be able to get water, and they'll truck it in, Sam's or, Costco and Walmart. They'll be able to get that, but it's not like a hurricane coming in where you have Mississippi Gulf Coast to Lafayette, northward to Macomb, everybody's buying up water. It's a small area, so I agree with you. I mean, I don't think we should panic, but we should be aware, stay on top of it, but I don't think we're going to have a water issue where we're not going to have water.
All right.
One thing I think may confuse people geographically is like people that have lived in this area and they hear, well, it's approaching Plaquemines Parish. Well, to a lot of people, Plaquemines Parish is like right next to Algiers. You cross the bridge and Algiers. What they don't understand that Plaquemines Parish is within 90 miles down the Gulf.
Yeah.
Which is about the distance between here and Baton Rouge, and so
it's not highly populated.
Yeah.
So you're not looking at a population of Orleans, Jefferson, hundreds of thousands of people.
Right.
You have camps and communities up and down Plaquemines Parish. It's a beautiful area, but you don't have that major infrastructure in people where you're going to have to take care of that many people as you would a larger city.
Well, they're dealing with it right now. They've been dealing with it for a while, and so now they got the reverse osmosis. Big ones to take care of that.
They just
and then
came
also,
in, I believe, yeah.
Gretna has its own water system, so they may handle it different ways. So
Right.
it just remains to be seen how we're all going to be impacted by that.
Yep.
All right, we'll be talking a little bit more about weather patterns with you later on in the show. Now we're going to go over to Errol because we are, of course, just very, very close to a governor's race and other elections. So let's take a look at the state races.
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple of the other elections, the Secretary of State's race and the Treasurer's race. This week, last week we talked about that the Picayune endorsed in the governor's race, and the question came up, how much good those endorsements do? Well, it depends on what the race is. Some good in the governor's race, but they do the most good in a low-profile race where people don't know who the candidates are, what the issues are. It's election day, and it says, what should I do? And to me, that's when newspapers are the most powerful because they're mostly a trusted voice and they're an independent voice. And so getting a newspaper endorsement, if you're in that kind of race, helps a lot. You know, especially like school board races in the past, if you get the newspaper endorsement, because nobody knows who those people are, it helps. And so this week, the Picayune endorsed in the Secretary of State race, and endorsed a woman named Nancy Landry, who worked in the administration of Kyle Ardoin, and so Picayune says she's an insider, knows.
We see here the whole slate of
knows,
who is running.
Knows how it works, and so you see the candidates right there, and so that's a big boost to have that in this kind of campaign. Like probably most people watching right now said, I don't know who these any people are. Other names of note, Glenn Collins Greenup ran last time. She got into the runoff now. To be honest and explain this, she's a Democrat, okay? And it happens in Louisiana politics now that you're having elections where there's mostly Republicans. And so if you have like one Democrat, the one Democrat's going to get that Democrat vote.
Well, Arthur Morell is a Democrat also. He's in there.
Well, I'll get to that, okay? Which will sweep him into the primary. And then in the primary, they're not going to win. Now, it's a little bit different this time because of Arthur Morell being in the campaign. He's from New Orleans, and so he has some name recognition in New Orleans. And so actually, you have two Democrats. And so they're really competing with each other almost to be in the runoff. And he was a longtime clerk of criminal court. So and they were the ones who always ran elections. And so he says, you know, I have the most experience at running elections.
And then so the Secretary of State also is responsible for maintaining the integrity of our elections, too. It's a very important spot.
You know, they're trying to make an issue about the integrity. Louisiana has been criticized all kinds of ways politically, but has always had a good reputation for running elections. I mean, going back through the years, it's always been very efficient. But you look at the issues that they're talking about, you know, it's election reform.
So we need to look at the next race right now because we're moving along in time.
Okay.
That you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, this is the treasurer's race, and this is to take the place of John Schroeder, who's running for governor. John Fleming is an interesting guy. He's a past congressman, and then he left Congress to work in the Trump administration, and he had several different jobs. He's from North Louisiana. At one time, he's a doctor. So at one time, he was even a coroner in, I think, in DeSoto Parish. So he's been all over the place politically. Scott McKnight is the guy who was endorsed by the Picayune. He's from Baton Rouge. He's a state representative, and they thought of him as somebody who was very, very straightforward and you know, and would be trustworthy. So just based on those endorsements, I would think that those two people are the leading candidates. Now, could there be some other cue giver that has more power than that? It could be, but I guess it depends on people's individual interests right now.
All righty. Okay, E, thanks a lot. Of course, there are other races, and we'll be talking about those
Sure.
in other shows, too. All right, but now, in terms of local races, Jefferson Parish races, Blake, you're going to talk about those and some hotly contested races on council there.
That's right. There are 5 parish council races, so 7 members. 5 of them are contested. I think the most interesting story out of this are the at-large races. So they represent the entire parish. And in those races, you have 2 incumbents who are facing off against 2 of their district colleagues on the council. So you have these colleagues going head-to-head. And in those races, you've seen some it's been pretty acrimonious. So in the Division A, you have Ricky Template, the incumbent, running against Jennifer Van Vranken, the Metairie District Councilwoman, who's term limited. There's also Frankie Hires, a frequent council gadfly, who's running as well. And then in Division B, you have Scott Walker, the former WDSU anchor, who sort of won 4 years ago as a political newcomer. And beat a longtime Politico, Paul Johnston. And he's running against Dominic Impastato, who's term limited, representing Kenner on the parish council.
And then there's some other district seats, too, that are open right now.
That's right. There are 3 district seats. So, with term limited candidates, it's an open seats for the Metairie-based seats. You have Melinda Bourgeois, former school board member, running against Hans Liljeberg. He stepped down as an appeal court judge. In District 3, you have a rematch of Byron Lee, the incumbent, against Derek Shepard, the former state senator who went to prison on money laundering charges, sort of making his political comeback. He's now a school board member. And then in District 4, to replace Dominic Impastato, you have Rita Bohannon and a family lawyer and Almarella, another gadfly, council gadfly, and then Jack Rizzuto.
Yes, go ahead, Ian.
So, Jennifer Van Vranken had been planning to run for lieutenant governor. And then when Billy Nunn-Gesser said, well, I'm not going to I'm going to stay as lieutenant governor. I mean, they thought he was going to run for governor. That changed the politics up and down the board. And so because of that, she was term limited. So she was running against Ricky Tibble. Had it not been for Nunn-Gesser's decision, Templey might be really having a really peaceful day today, but now that's a pretty contentious campaign.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time in something like 20 years that we've seen two sitting council members go head-to-head against each other in an election.
And we have two of them.
And we have two of them
Yeah.
at the same time. I think the most acrimonious contest, I'll say, is between Scott Walker and Dominic Impastato. They haven't really hidden their dislike for each other on the campaign trail. You know, at a forum a couple weeks ago, in Kenner, Scott Walker sort of was very clear that he said, you know, Kenner is losing population. It doesn't look as good as Metairie. Do you really want a Kenner politician, you know, running Jefferson Parish? So on, you know, Dominic Impastato's home turf, sort of criticizing Kenner.
Also entering the fray to some degree has been Sidney Torres, the fourth. Am I right on Sidney?
Yes, yeah.
Ivy. He's sort of launching negative ads against a couple of candidates that are not managed, but he's running their campaigns, Greg Buson. So what kind of dynamic is that pushing into this race?
Yeah, Sidney Torres has said he's going to put a significant amount of money in this race, about $200,000, which is about what district council members put in to run a race. So his gripe sort of stems from a personal falling out with Greg Buson, a former TV executive who's now a political consultant. They used to be allies, and you know, their falling out sort of traces back to a Kenner garbage deal that went sour. And so he's pledged to, like I said, put up $200,000 running ads against two of Buson's candidates, so Dominic Impastato and Arita Bohannon, and we've already seen some movement on that. He had an ad this week against Arita Bohannon that a judge ordered him to take down. You know, he immediately went to the studio and recorded a new one that sort of follows the court order, and apparently it's back out there.
Put it back up, and just really quickly too, you wrote a piece about the ad that Template is running, which is sort of a recreation of an ad that we saw some years ago during Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's right. They took inspiration from a 2018, or Greg Buson took inspiration from a 2018 Budweiser Super Bowl ad about sort of responding to an emergency, and sort of the first 10 or 15 seconds are shot for shot, you know, the same frames of getting out of bed, getting a call, an emergency, washing your face, and going out into the disaster.
Into a rainstorm and loading sandbags, and no, that wasn't real. Right? I mean, it wasn't actually the real event. This was
there was
they
no
brought
rain,
a rain machine.
so,
yeah, we know there was no rain recently. Okay. All righty, Blake, thanks a lot. Don, over to you. We're talking about weather. That's a real, you know, theme through this show, but it's impacting something that we really do love.
Yes. The drought is really going to have a significant impact on crawfish. And their crawfish industry, you know, we all love to gather around and drink our Budweiser and eat our crawfish, but it's a $230 million industry for the state of Louisiana, and only time really will tell what the drought is doing to it right now. 4.4 million residents of the state of Louisiana are in drought conditions. Bruce already referenced that, really. 300,000 acres that are dedicated to crawfish farming are affected by the drought. And the biggest problem that's happening now is the adult crawfish that burrowed at the end in April, May, June would go down into the ground, and then they're kind of sealed by a mud plug and they stay under the ground. Well, as the drought gets worse, that ground cracks. And when the ground cracks, the water evaporates, and the adult crawfish down in there that is going to be producing the babies for this next season die. And they don't know, they can't look down into the ground and open it up and see how many dead ones there are and how many live ones. So that's problem number one, the dry cracking ground and the water source underneath the ground that had been locked in becoming exposed and drying up and evaporating. The second problem is, as crawfish farmers need to flood their ponds to keep them wet and keep them from cracking, if those farmers are in southwest Louisiana where they depend on the surface canals to flood their pond, they're dealing with a salinity issue as well. It's not Mississippi River water. That's a totally different story than the crawfish story, but they still have high salt content in their waters because there frankly hasn't been enough rain anywhere. So the salinity is high, and the salinity also kills off the crawfish. So on top of that, the farmers are having to find sources of water that are clean. It's all costing more money. They don't know what's alive, what's dead under there. It's going to cost them the same either way to treat their ponds, and the same amount of work, the same amount of money, the same amount of effort, and they don't know what yield they'll have. So in terms of how it impacts all of us, it's really a supply and demand issue. If the supply is not great, the price is going to go up. It's kind of simple economics, and they won't know until we get much farther into crawfish season. You know, maybe good steady rain, and maybe that they have a bunch of fighters there under the ground who haven't been exposed and haven't been cracked, but nobody knows.
But usually December is when we first start seeing the crawfish, so we're not that far away.
We're
from
not that
crawfish
far
anymore.
away, and what they can't do, what they have to be real careful of, is not flooding their ponds too much, because if it's more than about 8 inches on the surface, then the crawfish underground think it's time to come up, and they come up and then they die, and then their decaying bodies cause oxygenation problems in that water for the crawfish that still survive. So it's just a nightmare for those farmers to try to figure out what to do and what the best course of action is right now to make sure they're maintaining adequate water supply, maintaining a good food source, which usually they rotate their crops. It's rice, and then it's crawfish, and then it's rice, and then it's crawfish. So they have to fertilize and water the rice nubs, basically, that the crawfish feed off of. And the rice can survive the drought, the rice can survive the salt, the crawfish can't.
Goodness, I mean, this is all, thinking about it, these givens that we have lived with crawfish season, a mighty Mississippi just flowing down and thunderstorms during the summer. We don't have that right now.
Well, what's interesting is, too, what is New Orleans and Louisiana and South Louisiana's biggest enemy? Water. Now we don't have enough water.
Right.
So to think about that, put it into context of there's a delicate dance of we need water, we need a tropical system to bring rain to balance out the atmosphere, but either you have too much or too little, and it affects so many people, like crawfish farmers, other type farmers, strawberry, farmers now.
Soybean farmers are having a really hard time with it too. The state could be losing 20 to 30% of its soybean crop right now. In addition,
So it's a problem.
Okay, well, we're going to stick with you, Mr. Weatherman,
Okay.
because we look to you to tell us what's in the future. We're in a drought, like
Right.
I know we really haven't experienced. This summer we had record temperatures like we haven't experienced. What are we looking at in months to come?
Well, the 90-day outlook doesn't look very promising for the Mississippi River Valley because we are in an El Nino year. Basically, El Nino is the warming of the Pacific waters off of the Baja of California, creates its own jet stream, and basically it shears off hurricanes, and it's better for us because they can't grow into big storms, and sometimes it'll even kill the storms. But the issue is when you have that, the jet stream is pulled so far north that most of the nation is very warm. The southern tier, from basically Arkansas south into Louisiana, into Florida, the Carolinas, is wetter, but the upper Midwest is drier. So the hope is more rain in the next 12, 15, 24 weeks up the basin, and right now a lot of the forecasts don't call for that. So the river yesterday was at, I think, 3.36, and if we remember when we had the big river floods, we were looking at 18 feet on the Carrollton gauge, and we're worried about the levees are up to 20 feet. So even though it's that point, we're fine, but it's so far down now. Again, the extremes. We need rain, we need water, but then we don't need enough. In the next 90 days, for the upper basin of the river, I just don't see a whole lot of rain with the pattern we're in right now.
And of course, with the heat and that high pressure dome, we also have seen the storms stay away from us, which, we're not complaining about that, that's for sure.
You have to give and take.
Okay, so Bruce, inevitably somebody is sitting home saying it's all global warming. Is that a fair statement?
You know what, Errol, and I get that all the time. And my answer is not to run from it, is that when I was young in Metairie, trick-or-treating, back in 72, 73, it was frigid cold.
Yeah.
We don't get cold fronts until Thanksgiving. So what has changed? We have anomalies of records. Oh, broke a record of, 55 years ago of, record cold. I don't know if there's been enough study on that. And I really can't take a placement on it. What I do know is that weather has been more violent. The tornado alley has shifted from Oklahoma and Texas now to northeast Louisiana into Alabama. That's a major shift of catastrophic issues. Hurricanes are stronger, more stronger storms, and rapid intensification of storms, where we're predicting a Category 2, we should be fine. I think Ida was a good example where, okay, we should be okay, but we always talked, and I mentioned many times, rapid intensification, where you may have a 2 coming in, and 12 hours before landfall, you can't evacuate, and now it's a 4.
Yeah.
So there's a change in global climate. Is it from emissions? Is it from, what man is doing? Or is it a cycle where the atmosphere has been here for millions of years, and we have a snippet of records of 150 years? It's infancy. So is this a long-term cycle, or is it a true, with more man, more production, more emissions? Is that happening?
So real quick, cold front next weekend, you think?
Looks like we may see a front. All the models are going with it. It looks like a week from Friday into the first week of October, we may have a bona fide, less humid front with maybe upper 70s in the day, some 50s at night, 60s at night.
We can dream. Okay.
We can dream.
All right.
Yes,
All right, guys.
there's
Real
hope.
quick now, other stories. E, over to you.
Okay. In addition to voting for candidates in the next month or so, and also being constitutional amendments, the state has 4 amendments on the October ballot, and then the runoff ballot in November, they have 4 also.
Okay.
So
We'll be on the lookout for that. Bruce, real quick.
All right. Hopefully rain will develop. Right now, no need to panic. Water's going to be there. The Corps is doing their job. City planners, they're doing their job. And it's really a wait and see.
Okay. Don.
Tomorrow at Children's Hospital, there's a groundbreaking ceremony for the 12,000 square foot child enrichment center that will be called Walker's Imaginarium, named after 9-year-old Walker Beery, who died of pediatric brain cancer and started the Kids Join the Fight organization. So they are getting started on that really super cool building that kids who aren't patients at Children's will also get to benefit from.
Wonderful. All right. Blake, over to you.
It's unclear if we're going to have a runoff from this race, but in November there will be another issue on the ballot in Kenner. They'll be voting on a millage increase for their firefighters, so that's something we'll be covering.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot for being here. Really great discussion. Thank you all for joining us, too, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.